So, welcome to a special episode of the Immigrant Education Collaborative Podcast. Today, I have two phenomenal guests, two phenoms who have blessed us and are going to enlighten us on a very interesting topic, a special topic that I think, folks should explore, and they're going to share their experiences with us. So, we have Khari Dawson and her mom, Dr. Khadijah Ali-Coleman. How you doing, ladies?
Doing great. So happy to be here.
Yes,
Thank
we're
you.
great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you're able to do this. So normally when I do this podcast, I usually have the podcast is really dedicated for either immigrants or children of immigrants, and we talk about them and their experiences navigating the US, the American education system. But I invited you two ladies on because I know you have really great experience with homeschooling, with choosing homeschooling as a path. And I think homeschooling is something that I want immigrant parents and families to kind of learn about. And I feel like you two are the foremost experts on this topic that I know. So I wanted you to come on so we could have a conversation about that. Is that okay?
It's perfect.
Sounds wonderful.
Cool, cool. So, Kari, I want to start with you. Can you just share with us sort of like your journey into how, you got into homeschooling? Like give us that path, and you can kind of start off with, from when you started school, like in a traditional sense, and then kind of when you transitioned into homeschooling.
Well, first I want to start by saying that I have been in traditional school, and there wasn't like a moment where I stopped doing traditional school forever. I transitioned from homeschooling to traditional school back and forth throughout my life. Um, but Um, how I got into homeschooling for the first time, I was very young. What grade would you say that was, mommy? That would be like,
Oh my goodness. I don't even think it was that segue between pre-K and kindergarten.
mhm,
Um, so you were maybe between 4 and 5.
Okay.
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the reason that transition happened was just because it was difficult for, I think, my teachers and people watching me at that time to understand what I needed at the time as a learner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, at that time, I guess it's easy to categorize a child who likes to get up and engage with different things in the classroom that, might not be the best time to do that in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was difficult for them to sort of manage me at that time, or it was easier for them to label me as a child who was different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so my mom started homeschooling me then. And I guess every time sort of I would come back into the school system, when I would come out, it would be sort of a similar story of like I had a interaction with a teacher who was sort of trying to label me as more of a troublemaker as opposed to somebody who was, I don't want to say alternative learner, but um, learned differently and I guess had more of a passion to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, Mom, so what was that like for you? Going through that.
So hearing her explain that it's always because I feel like I talk about it more to other people and just assume that she knows the full story. And I think um when I was explaining it in a session this past weekend, she was probably hearing elements that she hadn't heard before. But that early homeschooling was largely because we were moving from, she had been in a Montessori like school setting when we were
Mm-hmm.
living in Baltimore. We moved to Prince George's County, Maryland, and it was an age minimum. She was younger than the age minimum to be enrolled in kindergarten. So they had this secret test, mysterious test that she had to take. I wasn't able to prepare for it. I didn't know anything about it. They took her away somewhere and then came back and said she didn't pass the test. But
Hmm.
all the things that she said, I think it has a lot to do with that, looking at other these intangibles that indicate that someone is ready to be in a classroom. So I homeschooled her for a while, but then she wound up going to um it was a daycare slash private school, but where she was still engaging and learning um many of the things that you learn as a early learner,
Hmm.
which is a lot of creative play, which is a lot of access to books and things like that. And so when she says that and calls it alternative learning. Like this, it just was beautiful to hear and hear her explain it
Hmm.
because that's essentially it. She's always had a passion for learning so much so, and she always, and I loved seeing and never wanted to break it out of her that she felt entitled to be able to learn. And that, what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing. So if there are books, she's going to read those books.
Hmm.
If there's paper and pencil and access to crayons, she's going to write, she's going to create, she's going to
Hmm.
draw, she's going to engage. She has a curiosity, and that's really the foundational necessity when it comes to learning and having a child interested in learning. And so whenever it was any threat to that, she's right. It was always, it's time for us to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I need to reinforce that she was never a challenged student in terms of not able to do the work
Hmm.
or understand. If anything, when there was complaint from teachers, it was about she's finished her work, she's not putting her head down.
Hmm.
She's drawing or she's writing.
Right.
And to me, I don't look at those as problems. And so because um I actually felt chilled when I would hear things like that, then I knew
Hmm.
that the next step wasn't to be confrontational. It was just to leave because
Hmm.
this isn't the space for her.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So, Kari, as you hear your mom saying these things, what was it like going through the school system as you sort of went back and forth a couple times from traditional school to being homeschooled, but knowing the whole time you were well supported by your mom, by your dad, and you had the support, and the support sort of helped to bolster, your style of learning, the things that you're interested in. So, what was that like for you?
I think for that reason, like what you're saying, like having the support of my mom and my dad helped me to feel secure. Like
Hmm.
it helped me like feel like no matter where I was attending school or like if I was attending school,
Hmm.
regardless, I'm gonna have people who are gonna advocate on my behalf. And if things get so bad to where I have to leave school, then I will still have chances at learning.
Hmm.
I will still have the chance to um, have a personal life and a social life. So it never I never had to look at my schooling from a place of like deficit because I
Hmm.
knew that I always had like the backing and the support of my mom.
Yeah. Well, that's
Mhm.
awesome. So, Dr. Ali Coleman, so quick question for you. Homeschooling can seem a bit intimidating, right? So, you come from, a pretty solid background in terms of experience, and I think a lot of parents might say, okay, she was able to do this, and it may seem almost impossible. So, can you share with folks, some practical ways that they could potentially explore and maybe implement homeschooling if that's a viable option for them?
So first of all, this solid background. So I I I have been Dr. Ali Coleman since 2020.
Uh-huh.
Um and I have worked with young people, students of all ages in different capacities. But it is, you yourself as someone who's worked with young people know is very different sometimes. Um when you have children than when you don't. I know before I had Kari, I had all the plans, all the things that was not going to happen when I had my kid. Then you had the baby's here, and it's like, oh, and it's a certain responsibility that you feel that you thought you were responsible and cared and empathetic to other people's children, but then when your children get here, it's like, oh my goodness, because now what weighs on you is how am I not going to mess this person's life up?
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that a lot from the parents that I engage with in the through my group, Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars, and our annual teaching when parents come to me and they're interested in starting homeschool, and that's the main thing. Like, how can I avoid jacking up my child's future? Because
Mm-hmm.
we understand the connection between education and the future,
Mm-hmm.
and we put so much on this pathway of learning on what this child is going to be able to do when they become an adult. And it's actually more amplified once the children become teenagers, because then it's those final 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
How can I make sure? But I would say when I started homeschooling, um, I had no idea. I wasn't engaging with other homeschoolers, so I wasn't aware of the possibility. And so
Mm-hmm.
my mind immediately went into what it is that I know, which is this traditional idea of learner, teacher, and it's really teaching at them instead of all the possibilities of engaging them in the process. And
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I was working at Covenant House, Washington, in DC. I started shortly before Khari was born,
Mm-hmm.
but about a year or two after she was born, the executive director at the time was Vincent Gray, who many may recall as being the former mayor of DC. He
Mm-hmm.
was an amazing and excellent executive director and required every single person who worked at Covenant House, Washington, to be trained in advancing youth development theory, AYD, which
Mm.
I will say has been pivotal and foundational to the work that I have done ever since, and actually positively impacted my parenting practice as well. And what it did, it in addition to, maybe teaching and familiarizing me with new concepts, it really gave language to things I was doing already, but also showing the impact of certain practices on youth development. And so
Mm-hmm.
the theory itself recognizes that youth are already always going to be developing, but we as the adults in the lives of young people have the ability to make that youth development a positive experience. So
Mm.
that's why it's called advancing youth development. And
Mm-hmm.
so it recognizes that for most of us, when we're engaging with young people, we want them to have the benefits of opportunities, but the opportunities are out of their reach if we don't have the services and supports in place for them to
Mm-hmm.
be able to engage in the opportunities. And so at the time when I was working at Covenant House, Washington, and Covenant House is an organization that serves homeless youth age 16 to 24. And
Mm-hmm.
the program I was working with children from elementary to high school, and it was a preventative program. But we looked at examples such as, if you're working with homeless youth, what do you want? You want to provide them with transitional housing,
Mm-hmm.
and then the opportunity to then move into their own home. You want them to have jobs. But for instance, if you're sending them on a job call, and they don't have the access to pay for transportation, they don't have the clothes to prepare for the job, they don't have any type of training on how to engage in an interview, then they're most likely either not going to make it to the interview
Mm-hmm.
or be defeated beforehand and not even want to show up because they're not prepared. So they don't have the service nor the support to engage in the opportunity. And so you can apply that to really anything that we do, and we want for our young people, whether they are our own or other people's children.
Mm-hmm.
And so that in itself, that training in the early 2000s, really put a light in me with my parenting practice,
Mm-hmm.
and how I looked at these opportunities. I also think it would be remiss for me to not address the fact that a lot of the things that Kari talked about with how she was seen as a learner are very racialized interpretations as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, in one instance that she's aware of, she was 4 years old in a school. The teachers approached me about her getting up and while class is going on. She's listening, but she's at a writing station and things like that.
Right.
There would be things that she would do that white children, she was one of four children in a class of 16, one of four black children in a class of 16 children,
Mm-hmm.
and she could do something and it would be responded to in a very different way
Right.
than a white child. And often, that's what research finds is that our children are adultified, and punished for a lot of things that are really just typical behaviors of children on the psychosocial process. And you know this as a counselor.
Absolutely.
You know
Absolutely.
all this. So,
Yeah.
so having that as some foundational knowledge, it really was on me to push the boundaries of not falling into the whole trap of just
Mm-hmm.
replicating a traditional learning environment that we were moving away from.
Right.
And that was probably the hardest thing. So when you ask me, what do I tell parents to get started? They start
Mm-hmm.
with themselves because that
Mm-hmm.
mindset is going to get you. And I
Exactly.
will tell you, my work with students who are from different countries, outside of the United States who often have a much experience with a more rigorous educational
Mm-hmm.
environment. That is probably the most challenging thing when I've encountered um, parents who are international, have a
Yeah.
background from a different country, is how are you going to have the same rigor
Yeah.
if you are not replicating something that already exists?
Yeah.
And I would say that is probably that mindset is the challenge because you're not thinking of engaging the child as a co-facilitator in their learning journey. You're looking at it more of you are in charge, and
Mm-hmm.
and then if I don't have the capacity to do this, then what happens? And
Right.
you have to step outside of that mindset.
Yeah. I think you summed it up right with that last part, right? I think a lot of times it's the parent feeling like, okay, how am I going to teach physics? And I,
Hmm.
I never even took physics. So I appreciate that. And that's a great response by you. Kari, this question's for you. So being homeschooled, right? Like I know a lot of times folks just assume that when you're homeschooled, you're just sort of like isolated and, socially, you may not have the things. There are all these like old stereotypes about, students who are homeschooled. Can you speak about some of the advantages that you feel help to propel you and get you further ahead because you were homeschooled?
Mhm. Well, first of all, I think it was a great opportunity to like have a lot more friends that were specifically into the things that you were into.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like even like kids who go to traditional school, there's a lot of emphasis on like extracurricular activities so that you can have friends who are like, if you're interested in soccer, they like soccer too.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like when you're homeschooled, that can be just like everyone that you know is
Right.
people who like the same things. If you're going to co-ops and clubs and things that are based around like niche interests,
Mm-hmm.
and so I remember like one co-op that I really loved that was probably my favorite, like being homeschooled was one
Mm.
uh I forgot the name of it, but it
The
was a
80s farm or the
yes.
80s farm.
And so like as a kid and even now I was very big on farming and cultivation and stuff like that. And so
Mm-hmm.
my mom found a homeschooling opportunity where it was like this family and they inherited like I think it's like the
No, she was
mom.
still alive. She was still
Well,
alive.
oh, you can't inherit some. Okay, anyways.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it was a couple who the wife's mother had a farm.
Mm-hmm.
So she had a house and their backyard they had just turned into a farm.
Mhm. And so like through that, like they had us like raise chickens,
Mm-hmm.
like they gave us like eggs and stuff and chickens hatched and things like that. They had us make our own businesses and we like sold things that we made at like farmers markets and
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Yeah.
So like things like that can be a child's like entire education as opposed to like dedicating time to things that they might never use and aren't that interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
that's benefit.
I like that. So, and I'm coming back to you, Kari. So during your homeschooling years, right? Like, what are the things that you enjoy most about being homeschooled in terms of, how you got to learn, what you got to learn, and sort of the flexibility that you had to personalize your learning, as much as possible.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's like just what you're saying. Like I got to focus on literally whatever interested me. Like I've always been really big on writing, and I don't think a lot of kids get the opportunity to like have writing as their major in high
Mm-hmm.
school
Mm-hmm.
and like dedicate as much time to like craft as I got to in high school. And like when you get to college, that sort of stuff is noticeable, like
Yeah.
how much time someone has dedicated shows through their work.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
when you have kids that like, or other kid like people in or not high school but college, who it's clear that writing is their passion, but it's also clear that during high school they didn't get the opportunity to be writing as much as I got the opportunity to.
Yeah.
Or even like friends that I had that are environmental science majors, like
Mm-hmm.
didn't get the opportunity to cultivate and like, it's their chance to do that stuff in college,
Right.
whereas I kind of was already able to do stuff like that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So you got prepared early, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yeah. I love
But
that.
but it's the way that we even I don't even think I was we were thinking of it as preparation
Mm-hmm.
so much as in school, in traditional school, a lot of times it's like everything is preparing for something else.
Mm-hmm.
But when she was homeschooling, it was like we're interested in doing it. It would be great to learn how to do this,
Absolutely.
and it's really akin to what her dad and I like.
Mm-hmm.
Then we take a class, or we watch a YouTube video on it, and we learn, and we continue to build skills. I have a master's degree in mass communication,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the things that and I consult and help. Most of the things that I know about digital media, and I was an early adopter with video and things that are commonplace now, were things that I learned after getting my master's degree. And
Right. Right.
that's the thing, is learning is ongoing. And
Right.
so what has been cultivated in her is that whenever she wants to learn something,
Mm-hmm.
she knows how to go about learning and finding out how to do it, whether it's through a traditional means, taking a course, finding a resource online. But
Mm-hmm.
I think in the question that you were asking also, I think it would be remiss for me not to say that for high school, that was not my decision for
Mm-hmm.
her to
Mm-hmm.
homeschool for high school. That was her decision. And so she may want to talk about
Yeah.
why at this point when she's about to go to high school, why she decided, I'm ready to return to homeschooling.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So what precipitated that decision, Kari?
For me at the time, I think it definitely and it still feels like more simple than I think my mom thinks it was for me at the time. Because, like, in my mind, really, the reason, like, the biggest and the main reason I didn't want to go to school was because the school that I was going to go to had uniforms, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to. In my middle school, I didn't have to wear uniforms, so it just felt like a step in the wrong direction, like
Right.
having
Right.
all of this autonomy to like pick
Right.
out my outfits and
Yeah.
like, and I was honestly just getting good at like having like my own personal style and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Mm-hmm.
just felt like I'm not gonna go back to
Yeah.
being under duress, which is
Yeah.
what it felt like. But also, I think like even thinking about that, it's like a testament to like I guess the reason I wanted to be homeschooled was so that I could have the freedom that homeschooling would um offer me and give
Mm-hmm.
me. Like not only can I wear whatever I want, but I can learn whatever I want to.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. I think that was my main thing. Like I just didn't I wanted to progress and not regress when it came to like my personal autonomy and like becoming my own person.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
feel you. Yeah, because the uniform seems a bit restrictive, especially for someone who has a lot of self-expression is important to you, especially as a writer, as a creative, you don't want to be restricted in any way. So this question, I want both of you guys to take turns and answer this. So I want to talk about like the high school years and how, and if you can speak about the dual enrollment piece, right? Like how did you decide that instead of just sticking to just a general high school, track or curriculum that you did the dual enrollment? How did that decision come about?
I know that I became very nervous
Mm-hmm.
when high school came around. I think I was coasting easy, and for seventh and eighth, she had been in the creative performing arts school. And then she was gonna go to a performing arts high school. She got into two programs, and the biggest challenge that we had was determining which one was gonna be, it was so funny because her dad and I, didn't we like pitch to you what the pros and cons were for each program? And I think we really were trying, we thought she got in the video production program and the theater program, and we were just talking about what the pros and cons are depending on what she wanted to do. Like the video program, she could immediately go to work or be making money, but neither he nor I really wanted her to go to that school.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she asked to be homeschooled, it was like, yay, but then it
Yeah.
was like, oh,
Yeah.
so that means that, okay,
Yeah.
because I don't want to ruin her. And so she, at that time, she was very adamant that she was not interested in college. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wasn't freaking out, but I was like, if it's not college, then what's it going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And then so she had a lot of things that she was like, I'm not trying to do anymore. Please do not put me in
Mm-hmm.
any more co-ops. Edie's farm that she was talking about that she really liked, that family had packed up and moved to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have,
Yeah.
that was, I mean, I enjoyed that co-op the most, just seeing the things that they did. And they had children as well that they
Yeah.
were homeschooling, and she got along with their kids. Um, so it wasn't really things like that available anymore. So I was trying to think of so I was building my knowledge arsenal of what are the possibilities for high school, and what can that look like. And I also was in my doctoral program, so um, I was really in research mode,
Mm-hmm.
and had started, and I was teaching college as well. So I was learning about this thing called dual enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
I was having homeschooled kids coming to my classes and knew that that was an option as well. And so I started checking out what the possibility was at a local community college and pitched that to her as an idea that, she could start taking classes during her homeschool years, which will cut short any time in college since she's adamant she doesn't want to do college. So I was like trying to pitch it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so she wasn't anti that pitch. And so her freshman year, which would have been her ninth grade year when she was 14, she began taking, what was that, Kari? English and sociology?
Mhm.
Yeah, and at a local community college, in addition to, I feel like you were doing a curriculum. It was something we else that you were doing at home, but we also started like I started really um recognizing what self-directed learning looked like in homeschooling. So
Mm.
for her, she definitely by ninth grade knew what she was interested in, and had an approach to learning. So she was really into plants during
Mm-hmm.
high school. Um, every time we go out, could we get a plant? She was propagating. She and her dad, we had a whole, um, our living room had all these plants that the two of them, they were propagating pieces of the plants and things like that. So that became botany.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were things like that. She would go with me. She would intern with my arts company. And because she had those 2 years at her performing arts school for seventh and eighth grade, she's is more classically trained than me in theater.
Okay.
So she was given notes to, and we talk about this still. My company, we talk about how Khari would be like, I have notes, and
Yeah.
she would give us feedback. She would be our stage manager for some of our shows. So she was actively doing real life experiences as
Hmm.
opposed to preparing for something. She was like working and she was engaging in these things, and that was what was more normative for her during those 4 years. Would you agree? Am I leaving anything out?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Kari, how was the dual enrollment experience for you?
It was really good.
Hmm.
Um, there were some rough moments, like when it came to stuff I wasn't used to, like, or not used to, but stuff that I had more experience struggling with, which
Mm.
is like math and like science related things. But like when it came to literally everything else, it was always like a really cool experience. Like I got to take like screenwriting classes and film classes where we would watch um movies that I still love to this day and still like think about to this day. I met like somebody who I now like consider one of my mentors, who was at the time my English professor, who taught me so much about like craft and when comes to both like poetry and prose.
Hmm.
So yeah, I had a really good experience, and I think it definitely shaped who I am as a thinker, and like definitely shaped who I would become as a student in undergrad, like going to like a 4 year university.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So, speak a little bit about the dual enrollment in terms of, are you graduating with a high school diploma and also an associate's, or are you just taking, you're just taking a bunch of college courses while you're pursuing your high school diploma? How does it work?
So for me, I didn't get a high school diploma because I wasn't doing like the school systems, like I wasn't following like the school systems curriculum or
Yeah, you don't get a yeah, she didn't, and
Okay.
she didn't do a GED. So
Okay.
so I graduated her from my homeschool. I gave her the little certificate. She
Okay.
didn't even mention that. She was
Yeah.
like, thanks. But she got a degree from CCBC.
Gotcha. So she got an associate's.
Yes.
Mhm.
Right. Okay. Awesome. And then she got the diploma from you, mom.
Yeah.
From
Yes. That I took the time making, and apparently it didn't.
it didn't hit as well.
And I framed it and everything.
Yeah.
She could care less. But yeah, so yeah, I graduated her from my homeschool like in May of 2021. And then she graduated from CCBC like that, the end of that week.
Okay. That's awesome.
Hmm.
So now you're armed with your associates. So I remember your mom saying earlier that you were like, "Yeah, I'm not really going to college." So what was the plan once you got your associates?
Well,
Oh,
by then the
yeah.
plan was to go to college.
Yeah.
Yeah, she had
um,
been applying to colleges by 2020. She was
yeah.
active. Tell them how many colleges you applied to.
I don't even remember, but it was a lot.
It was
Okay.
like 20. You applied to
Mhm.
20 schools.
So you already you're on track. So you had moved on from I'm not
Yeah.
going to college to
Yeah,
I'm
outside of
all
that.
in.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. And so talk to us a little bit about what you like your love for writing and creating, like and then also the associate's degree, your bachelor's degree, and then I know you're going to be pursuing a master's also. So can you talk about your area of interest, your area of genius?
Um, yeah, sure. I guess I just love to write. I said earlier, like a little earlier,
Hmm.
how it was just always something that I liked to do, and always something that I did was like writing stories and stuff. Um, and so when I was younger, I would mostly write stories. I
Hmm.
found this app when I would say like about to enter like double digits, like
Hmm.
um called Wattpad,
Mm-hmm.
where people would like write their own stories or write their own like internet based novels that they would like, you could update, like you didn't have to write the book all at once, you could
Mm-hmm.
like update, give like chapters as you were able to write them and stuff like that. And so I got my, I guess, my start there, and I would
Mm-hmm.
just write my own stories, and I found community through that, and learn not even just about craft on there, because there's not really much to learn about craft on Wattpad, but like just learned a lot about um like politics low key, like
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of other Black girls on there who had experience, you know, being in the school system, but they would also talk about things that were like way outside of the scope of like what we had experience with. Like they would talk about like Gaza on there, and this is
Mm-hmm.
like 2014 or something. Like, so I learned a lot on Wattpad, and so like getting my start on there kind of inspired me to really never stop. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would just continue to write. And so when I it was time to apply for like schools and stuff, that was sort of like, of course, that's what I'm gonna do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so yeah, once I got into USF, I majored in creative writing, and there I sort of primarily became a poet as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to a fiction writer or short fiction writer. And yeah, I've just been writing ever since,
Yeah.
and um, submitting and dealing with, you know, the writer life, which is like rejection, and then also the feeling of being like super lauded and seeing people interact with your work and love it.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. How does it feel to know that this love that you had as a child, right? Essentially back when you were 4 years old in this Montessori school where you got up and walked over to the corner while they were, demonstrating or doing whatever, but you had this love of learning that was just pulling you of writing, and that's what you're doing right now. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like how
Mhm.
how is that how is that for you?
Honestly, I think it made at a point it made me confused because I think it's very popular in our culture to like tell people, okay, you're gonna have this one moment where you realize like this is what I'm meant to do,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't really take into account like sometimes, or maybe they do, but like sometimes it is literally something that you've been doing your whole life, and like, you know, no other way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's something that you've like, it's been there your whole life, you've been doing it your whole life, I guess it's maybe harder to have that realization like, oh, that's actually my passion, even though it's, we're not like intersecting at this like kismet moment, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Absolutely.
So when I realized like, oh, okay, it's not gonna be this thing of like finding something outside of myself, it's gonna be me connecting with something that I've always liked and loved, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. I think, Mom, it ties back into what you were saying about at the Covenant House, right? Before I guess you became a mom, and
Mhm.
and essentially, you know, um, learning how to put the child first in a sense, right?
Mhm.
And advance their development.
Mhm.
So I guess my question for it's another question for Kari, right? Because here, this is what I think, and you can indulge me in this. I think a lot of times in like sports and music, like we see, you could tell when a child is sort of like ahead of the curve and they're already, like the kid has a chance to become a professional musician or a professional athlete or something like that. So like with Serena and Venus, you know what I mean? So you'll see a lot of, or even child actors, right? Or and actresses, you'll see a lot of them, they'll take the homeschooling path because they see that, okay, I found my thing and I need I still need to go to school, but I needed to fit into my schedule. So I need the flexibility, right? I think in your case, it's, whether it was intentional or not, like this talent still got cultivated and you got the reps in, right? I think that's what you were mentioning earlier. Just you could see the difference between who's put those 10,000 hours in, those 10,000 iterations in, the error correction and honing this craft, this intentionality that you've had, and you're seeing that. Like you're still, young, you know what I mean? And I mean that in the most respectful way. But so like the sky's the limit for you, but you've also had a lot of time to really hone your craft and really focus on it. So is that is like how does that make you feel? Is that like empowering? Are you excited about it? Or are you just like, oh, it's just another day being Khari?
I guess I never like really like thought about how it makes me feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um I think maybe like when I was in workshop settings like in college, I think it made me feel um confused because when I would workshop my work, like my peers would like essentially not really like it, whereas like then my teacher would like after class like tell me like this was the best like workshop that we've had this like entire semester. So it was like it was confusing in that way because my peers thoughts about my work wasn't not important to me.
Mm-hmm.
um and so I guess I just had a moment where I was like, what whose opinion is important to me
Mm-hmm.
and why is it important to me?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just like thoughts around things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's sort of my reaction to it and how I
Yeah.
felt about it.
And
Mhm.
I love that response, right? Because it's art in the sense, right? So even though your art may be a little bit more mature than where your peers are because you've had so much more experience and so many more reps than they have, that the instructor, it resonates with the instructor or your professor a lot more than it would with your peers. So I guess it's interesting that way, because with my sports analogy, in sports it's about winning and losing, right? But with art it's not so much about winning or losing. It's just how is this work going to be interpreted. So
Right.
I love your response. So mom, we're not going to leave you out.
Oh,
So
I'm
can you,
I'm enjoying
you
listening.
enjoying this? So so what I need you to help us with, right? For the other parents who may be interested in exploring the homeschooling as an option, is for you to just give us some tips about, for parents, right, who maybe a little bit, intimidated by jumping in. Like what would you tell those parents? Like what sort of resources would you suggest to them?
I I would before even jumping in, I would
Mm-hmm.
really encourage them to be open to pay more attention to their children if they
Mm-hmm.
don't already.
Mm-hmm.
I think that parents should be more familiar with their children's learning styles, the things that they
Mm-hmm.
respond to, the things that they show interest in more so than anyone else. Um,
Absolutely.
you are engaging in homeschooling and you have that familiarity, then everything else will be easier because you're familiar with what your child is more apt to respond to. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that was probably the thing that led me from the very beginning, and really has been part of my parenting plan, was just to really pay attention. And I say this as someone, um, as we all do. I think when we start out being parents, we swear that we're going to be different than our own parents. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm the oldest of five children. I specifically did not want to have as many children as my mother did,
Mm-hmm.
because I believe that there was a limit to her time and her attention to each of us. And
Mm-hmm.
what I knew that I wanted to give to my child was that attention and the knowledge that I'm aware of who they are as a person, and what those things that they lean towards. Because I didn't feel supported. Her dad and I talk often. Like her dad is a musician, a multi-instrumentalist,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how we met. We were in a
Mm-hmm.
band together, and both of us talk about, we didn't have the support that we felt that we needed as children,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we knew that we were going to give to her, was that attention.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that was there, but there are other areas that I could have been better at,
Mm-hmm.
when it came to um, those foundational years for her. I could have maybe given her attention in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so it all kind of balances out. But I would tell parents that I think they need to be familiar with who their child is as a learner. What do they
Mm-hmm.
like to do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that one of the things that I don't just extend to Kari as my daughter is to people in general. I can pay attention to somebody and I can tell immediately what are someone's strengths,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that my students at the university I teach at are often amazed when I give them feedback because I have care with my engagement with them. And I think a lot of parents can benefit from cultivating that care with their
Absolutely.
children, because that is going to impact their response to learning, is
Yeah.
how what that environment that the parent is cultivating and that reaction that they give when their child is engaging in something that brings them joy. And
Yeah.
so Kari has always known that, I have enjoyed, from when her writing was scribbles on a page
Mm-hmm.
to when she started writing things like that I could understand.
Mm-hmm.
I was always amazed and encouraging. But when she began to create these stories, it was, I don't even know where this she it's very young, she was able to enter a story in a way that was so far beyond anything that I had read by anyone that young. And so I knew that this was someone who had to be encouraged because there was a gift that was there. And so the mentor that she mentions, her English professor, wrote her the best
Mm-hmm.
college recommendation I've never written a recommendation like that for anybody, and I've
Yeah.
never read a recommendation
Yeah.
that was so glowing like as the one that she wrote for Kari. And Kari got a full ride to the university she just graduated from.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, Kari, we're gonna get ready to wrap it up. I appreciate you taking your time to share your story. But I have one last question, and my last question is: as you're getting ready to embark on your MFA, what are you excited about? Since you've been on this magical journey, what are you looking forward to? What are you excited about? That's on the horizon.
That's a good question. I'm looking forward to even further like honing my craft. I think a cool thing to learn is like learning that you'll never stop learning things that pertain to your craft
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that you love to do. So I I would, I'm looking forward to never approaching writing from a perspective of like I know everything or
Mm-hmm.
like I'm fully developed. Um yeah, I'm excited to keep learning and to
Yeah.
keep honing. Mhm.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And you can see that you had the building blocks to sort of where you were able to develop this framework, right? So from working on the farm, you and your dad with the plants, your mom, your writing, you're seeing all these building blocks and you're just following the process, which is really cool. You know what I mean? To get the outcomes that you're after. So mom, one last question for you. Before we wrap this up, first of all, I'm gonna put all of your information in the description. So we're not going to go over your bio or anything like that because it would be here all day. Um, but lastly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like homeschooling, it's a great option. And I know, and when I asked you the last question, it was implied that yes, parents will be deliberate and intentional about knowing their child, their learning styles, and all those things that go along with it. But I feel like homeschooling is still, I know it's growing, since COVID, it's gone up, especially for Black families. Um, but my question for you is, um, what are some, reasons why parents should think or consider homeschooling? And let me say this. It could be that the child is, you're getting a lot of calls from the school, you're getting, you're just not getting the results that you want. So just give us some reasons why parents should consider homeschooling as an option.
So, I really I really enjoy being with Kari. I love her so much. Always have. And so homeschooling just allowed us time together. And it 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 was a really great opportunity to do a lot of fun things. Where learning didn't always have to learning didn't have to be painful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I definitely could have done more when it came to math. I think that was, but I don't think it was we had used to have, what would we call our Sundays when we would do math? Uh she hated, so her dad and I, we were like we're all in this together. Like we're
Yeah.
gonna get through this math, and she was like, "Oh my God." But that was still fun to me. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say to parents, I don't think we should wait. We should be waiting for something bad to happen, for something bad to pop off
Mm-hmm.
without us already having a mode of operation when it comes in our to what the practices that we engage in with our family, with our
Mm-hmm.
children. Like just like we should have an emergency escape plan instead in case, especially the way things are going now
Yeah.
politically.
Mm-hmm.
We should all have a mode of of where we're gonna meet up if something happens and we're not in the same place. I think something like that should all we should have a not a necessarily escape plan, but an educational plan with how we engage with each other. So even when our children are in these traditional settings, what does learning look like? How do we
Mm-hmm.
cultivate learning in our home? And so then, if it's a need to pull the child out of the school or the traditional learning space, we still have this modus operandus in our home
Mm-hmm.
where it's not going to be, and that's, I think that's through her school, and why it was just so easy. We were either in it or out.
Yeah.
It was consistent for her
Yeah.
because she knew that learning was going to take place wherever she was, just like Dorothy
Absolutely.
says in The Wiz, or she learns by the end that home is with her wherever she is.
Yeah.
That is kind of what our operation was, that learning is going to happen,
Yeah.
but what are the resources that we have at this moment to make sure that that happens?
Okay.
And I want parents to think like that,
Mm-hmm.
to not get so reliant on institutions always being there, that there can be disruption at any turn. But what is it that you have put in place for your family that can exist while these institutions exist and without them? You
Mm-hmm.
should never feel where you're at a total loss because something that someone else created is no longer existing. And it really troubles me when parents say, well, the teacher's responsible for it. No, that's your child. You're
Mm-hmm.
responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher's job is during this work day, but in general, and that's one of the things that I always felt when I engaged with the students, when I was working at Morgan State with
Mm-hmm.
students from different countries, from the Caribbean, from Africa, and we talked about education, and I loved learning. Is that it was always this expectation um, to be for learning to be front and center. And this rigor that I speak of is a mentality. It's not just what the school is cultivating, but it's this mentality that you need to be knowledgeable and that you have the responsibility of learning and applying that learning within or without the school. And many of those students carried it when they came to the States,
Mm-hmm.
and that's definitely something that I believe as well. And I think Kari kind of carries that with her, with just naturally.
Mm-hmm.
She has a higher expectation of her peers and herself.
Yeah.
So
No, that's really awesome, ladies. And I really appreciate y'all taking the time out to do this. This was a great conversation. Hopefully, folks will get a much better, clearer understanding of the possibilities and the power of homeschooling. So thank you all so much for joining us.
It was a
Thank
pleasure meeting
you.
you. Just all that you're doing in the community. I just want to give you your props and your flowers because you are just so necessary and you're doing good work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all.
Much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.